All right, you good, sir?
I'm good.
All right, let's go. So welcome to the best of Microsoft Build. We are talking about the events that we all visited, so you don't have to, in a sense, but an opportunity for us to give you a little bit of a fire hose today. We started this off by talking about the Build Top 10, and this quickly became the Build Top 67, based on the number of slides that we produced over the course of the week. So if there's one thing that may happen in this event today, is that we don't get through all the content. So one of the things we're going to make sure we do after this is kick out the deck that we've produced with all the different links and demos and click-throughs of the really interesting things that we learned at Microsoft Build, and opportunities for you to take advantage of some of the latest and greatest tech. Some of this is available now, some of it's not. We're going to drive through this at light speed, and there's going to be 4 people from Concurrency who are talking about this today. So really quickly, we're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to move past the typical kind of longer intro. My name is Nathan Lesnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. Been a Microsoft MVP for 13 years. Did a lot of build conferences, but this has been one of the best in my opinion. So looking forward to digging into this with you today.
I'm Brian Hayden. I'm a solution architect at Concurrency. This was my second build in attendance, and it was by far the best. Been in Concurrency for 6 years, been in consulting for 20, and happy to talk about what we learned.
My name is Alexandre Fernandes. I'm the lead data scientist here at Concurrency. This was my first build, but it was an exciting event to be in the AI space and attend such a AI-filled event.
Yeah, my name is Nick Woods. I'm a senior software engineer at Concurrency. I've been a consultant for about 4 years now, kind of a specialty in identity. I've been, this is my first build, but it was a great, just like Shalantra said, it was a great experience. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Awesome, guys. And Brian, Nick, and Alessandre had the opportunity to be on site at Build. So that is something else you're going to add into the picture here. So we have a laundry list of things to cover. This is the kind of quick shot of all the things we're going to be talking about today. Some of these we'll spend more time on than others. And we're going to start off by talking about specifically commodity AI. So commodity AI, meaning one of the things Microsoft has really done well in the context of Build is talk about how do we add AI as a capability across all of our generic things that we do, not so much in terms of custom models, but more so in the sense of like everyone's general productivity. How do we force multiply the capabilities of an individual in the work that they do on a daily basis? Think like spell check, right? Everybody's gotten so used to spell check as part of their normal everyday life, they don't even think twice about it. What happens when AI becomes that same thing to you? So Brian, why don't you just kind of like, let's just talk about the idea of like Copilot for everyone. What does that even mean? What is Microsoft talking about there?
As a developer, I hear Copilot, my ears perk up. But for the everyday person, they probably don't understand what that means. And Copilot is a brand name for a add-in for developer tools to accelerate the development process. Essentially getting kind of a ChatGPT interface, as you're doing your workloads. And so what Microsoft's done is they've embedded the Copilot essentially platform into all of their M365 apps. So we're looking at like when you use your Microsoft Whiteboard, as you're typing notes, you can ask it to summarize this, or you can, exchange, information from your Office 365 tenant. So in terms of capabilities, you're going to see Copilot being turned on for all of your Office apps across the ecosystem, including even embedded in SharePoint and other tools that aren't like in-app as well. So the next thing that came up is this concept of plugins. And I freaked out when I heard plugins. I think Alexandre and Nick, I turned to both of you when they started talking about the plugins, and I said, oh my gosh, here we go again. And it's the 1990s, the first browser all over again. We're going to have these plugins, but in terms of the context of what the plugins are going to offer for the Office ecosystem, we're probably going to get a lot of useless plugins that are going to be created, but There's a really rich set of interfaces that are going to be enabled for all these different Teams apps, Power Apps, being able to develop it. Those SDKs are currently available, but as Nick and I got to talking to some of the product teams, getting those things out to the market, they're not quite ready to do yet. So as a developer, you can go ahead and start playing with it, and building some of these ChatGPT plugins right into your apps, but you won't be able to get them to the Microsoft Store for a couple of months yet.
I think one of the things that was really exciting to me is that we as developers get to lean on the work that other companies are doing to embed their capabilities into the ChatGPT interface. And then that cascades into apps that we build for Teams, apps that we build for Power Platform, or even very rich applications that we construct across even a custom chat interface. This idea that like Orbitz or Wolfram or whoever creating their own kind of plugin for whatever information that they're providing into the ecosystem, we can tailor that into something that we're custom creating.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So when we think about the plugins, there's kind of this connection. We've been working in the AI space and the ChatGPT space here for a few months since it's released at the beginning of the year. And so I guess we kind of understand this context, but what's important to understand is that if you were to ask ChatGPT, give me some information about X, it's going to go out and search the entire World Wide Web essentially and give you a response to that. But if you wanted to target something that your business does, a good example would be, I'm doing tax forms and you wanted to really just use my information to respond. These plugins are going to enable you to really focus towards that business. One of the use cases at Build was some law documentation. So I want to add some sort of a T&C into my contract. And it would go ahead and just embed that, but it uses a plugin to be able to pull information from a specific provider that has legal documentation. So what you're seeing here is really good example of how this is going to be embedded into your documents and through the ecosystem, is that you're going to see this Copilot icon in all of your applications, and it'll pop up a chat interface that you can ask questions and perform actions on it. So, if you type draft a proposal, it'll give you like a snippet of what you want to do, click the button, boom, it's in your document, you're good to go.
What I think is really interesting about this is like the next step on the here's 15 ChatGPT prompts that you can use to construct your documents. So people go out there, they type stuff in, it produces some text, they cut and paste. The cut and paste kind of works. This is like the next step of that, embedding that request or that prompt right inside the context of the inline document as you're writing, which is just like killer, right? That's the next step. Producing something that, ultimately creates, the outcome of at least a starter document that then you're then editing.
Yeah, exactly. And it really going to be amazing.
So a lot of there's more information that you can get specific to this. Semantic index kind of comes into play in the context of your SharePoint content.
Well, no, it comes into play for the entire ecosystem.
There you go, yeah.
So you set it up. So a couple things to note really quick. We've got a guest here that's asking some questions about it. So right now, in March, they rolled this out to 20 pilot enterprise customers. That's been opened up to 600 that signed up for the early preview, the early access program. I have not been able to sign up for an early access program myself. I think you got to reach out to maybe an enterprise rep or something to get yourself, backdoored into the program. But one of the things that they're guiding individuals at the onset of this is, once it's available, which is coming the next month or two, get the semantic index for Copilot enabled for your organization. What that's going to allow Copilot to do is kind of do the prep work of ingesting your information from all sorts of different OneDrives, SharePoints, Teams, messages, all that stuff, and bring that information together so that when Copilot is turned on for your organization, that you'll have access to that. And in terms of licensing, Semantic Index right now is available with your E3 and E5 license. Not right now when it gets turned on, but the guidance that I got from this is to watch for it in your Office Admin Center. You'll get notifications that pop up that says this is a feature that's now available, and your organization can enable it.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, into the next construct of that we're talking about at Build is this idea of your company AI, and this is where a lot of our work over the last several months has been tied to, which is companies trying to take advantage of the sort of AI momentum to be able to enable the unique language of their business in the context of their applications. And a lot of that has been done on preliminary architectures that have kind of come out as a result of that forward momentum of ChatGPT and OpenAI. What Microsoft has done is start to formalize the structure that they're using to be able to enable that for customers. And I'd love for Alessandre to talk a little bit about what is this structure that we're starting to see as a pattern as we're doing these projects, and how is Microsoft starting to formalize some of the approaches that we use to be able to bring that data into real life in apps or internal and external use cases.
Thank you. And I think the canonical pattern of taking your information and enabling this AI on your private information is to use your data sources along with the OpenAI models and have users interface them through either a Copilot or an OpenAI application. And with that, the very important question of how is Microsoft using my data? How is this secure? So if you go to the next slide, to iterate across all of the Azure OpenAI resources, all of the data that you use for fine-tuning a model, all the data that is used to prompt a model, all of the models themselves, they are contained within your Azure subscription. So this would be all of the embedding models, all of the completion models, the chat models, and your data is protected by the most comprehensive enterprise compliance and security controls that we enjoy across all of the Azure resources.
I think another way to say this too is that, like, if you were comfortable using cognitive services, the same essential models, the same essential approach is used for the OpenAI models. And I think I'm really glad to see them kind of solidifying this communication of how they're approaching that broadly, because that's been probably the number one question we get as people are trying to advance using OpenAI in their business.
So the Azure OpenAI resource falls within the cognitive services agreements. So that's absolutely right. And this is one new exciting feature that's going to be rolled out to the Azure OpenAI Studio. If within your organizations, if you have tried to incorporate your own data into a ChatGPT or the GPT models, you very quickly find out you're going to need some custom development work to even get started. That's not something you can do through this studio today. This new feature would allow you to get off the ground without any custom dev work. This will be a feature that allows you to take your own custom information, upload it through the Azure OpenAI resource. It will create your index for you, and it will pull relevant information as you use the tool. And there's a specifics and this is a specific user interface they come up with, and you can see it's 4 well-defined, clear, easy steps to follow. And if you go to the next slide, what is happening sort of in the back end, and limit the responses to your contact data as a checkbox basically means only reply if my contact data supports a question. And in the back end, how it would look like. So if you were to do this today without this feature rollout, you would need to sort of custom build these components right here. This new feature would allow you to get off the ground pretty quickly. It will take care of all this infrastructure on the back end.
Thanks, Alessandre. And I think one of the things that was really interesting is how this powers the kind of capabilities that we're seeing requests from companies now every day. The ability to surface information, which is things like product manuals, is an example of one that uses that same framework that we just talked about. This is one they showed at Build, which is essentially a healthcare chat that's centric to asking questions about a particular type of policy for a B2C scenario. Like I'm a consumer of the healthcare chat, of a healthcare program, and I want to ask about my services that I'm receiving, using that same kind of embedding of the unique content of an organization versus what might have been found on the internet. Creating that in the context of a customized interface that's centric to that individual user, embedding it within a Teams platform. This is something that we've done at Concurrency, which is actually to surface it right within Teams as something that people can ask questions about. The idea of even using that same approach to be able to ask questions against data, not limited to just documents, but actually having this write the request to ask questions of an actual database and return information. So in this context, you can see, show me revenue by product in descending order. This is a GitHub repo Microsoft's produced to be able to kind of model out how you go about doing this using their best techniques. Essentially letting you ask a question, but then having ChatGPT use the Codex model to be able to actually create the query into the SQL database, which is using that same approach that we just talked about. Same here with building out a kind of predictive model associated with revenue over a period of time. This kind of combines things that we did early in the AI cycle of like predicting demand inventory forecasting in conjunction now with a model that is conversational in nature. And then even being able to surface a Copilot in the context of your teams that might be specific to a type of service that you're delivering. So in this case, being able to ask questions about a person and then surfacing data from a business system in the context of Copilot directly within the Teams interface, or within a customer service interface, bringing information back within that data platform, allowing this chat interface to be more contextual versus kind of just a dumb lookup, making it something that's an inline process. Now, that's probably something that's a learning from us is some of these models are more performant right now than others. So as you're designing, one of the things that we found is you have to be aware that like time to reply on a GPT-4 is a lot slower, right, Brian?
Yeah, it's latency can be like 5 seconds to get a response from the service. So using like some of the simpler models or we get you like response times of like, sub-second or second and a half, in addition to just being lower cost.
I thought this was really interesting, and maybe Alessandra and Brian, you want to talk about this a little bit, which is just essentially the idea of creating your own company Copilot. And they created a framework essentially to be able to produce that.
Go for it, Alessandra.
Yeah, so Microsoft is making available to developers this architecture for building your own Copilot applications. So this would be Copilots that are not quite as wide as the Office 365 Copilot, but it would be something very targeted towards something that you have a need internally. It could be HR helper Copilot, for instance, or it could be a Copilot that helps with sort of the more training intensive things that the employees would have to do, which is very exciting space.
I'm also going to add here too that there was a lot of content that was talked about around AI safety. And while this slide kind of has a maybe, grayed out as not really being something that's important, Microsoft is providing the tools for you to be able to keep AI safe. I think you might even have a slide on that in a little bit.
Got a whole section on that.
Yep.
This is an example of kind of what a Copilot could look like in the context of a normal workday experience, a request from a customer that is a request for a quote, sending that into an extracted information in line with the work that they're already doing in Outlook. This could be a business system as well. And then turning that into an accepted order that's then sent back to the customer, essentially taking the human effort of constructing the order out of line, doing that for them, building the potential order that could go back to the customer or request, sending that back to the customer. This happens to be a live type of example we see many times now where like they're either building in their unique business system or inside like the space of Teams or the space of Outlook that they're working within. Prompt flow. This was pretty wild. You want to talk about this, Alessandra?
Yeah, so this goes in line with the of building Azure OpenAI powered systems without really needing a ton of custom dev work. And this comes from the Azure ML, what used to be called Azure ML Studio, that's now being called Azure AI. it's basically a studio enablement of it being able to build composite prompt systems, and it has native LangChain support, and we have an example of this in the next slide, of how this will look like. So for those of you who have played with Azure AI before, we had the pipelines, the components and pipelines that you could build any machine learning model that way. And now this will be enabled for you to build composite sort of systems. In here you have an input, and this could be a text chat, and you no longer have to really stick to a linear way of designing a system. You can really make it as intricate as you would require for you to solve your problem at hand. And there's a ton of promise here on being able to implement embedding, custom prompting, some safety guards as well against guessing, things that we would need to do sort of by hand. Custom development is something that Azure OpenAI is allowing us to do directly in the Azure subscription.
Awesome, thanks. And then Alessandro, as a Hugging Face fan, I know this is something that is kind of near and dear to your heart.
Yes. So it's great that Azure OpenAI allows us to tap into the GPT models. However, the transformer ecosystem is really a wealth of models that can be used for any business problems. And now Azure AI is making Hugging Face or open source transformers available through the Azure AI platform. So you no longer have to leave the Azure ecosystem to be able to bring in some of these open source transformer models.
I think that goes in line with a lot of the conversations we have when we're designing these systems, that like ChatGPT has kind of spurred on the like initiative to go do it, but sometimes the solution is like a composite of a bunch of things. And that OpenAI may be the front end, but behind it may be cognitive services. It might be an open source model. It could be a lot of things that would exist behind the scenes.
Yeah, and this really resonates with me. I posted something on LinkedIn during build that Microsoft is really moving forward right now with this, policy of just being open community to, people that, I think, what was it? Jira was, prominently displayed a few times, but, working with other open source communities or other product lines that aren't in the Microsoft ecosystem is just a really nice thing to see that Microsoft's continuing to do this year.
And going to that whole idea of plugins that we talked about earlier, this is an example of that, like real time as well, like things that you might take advantage of. I know I got familiar with Instacart a while back, not buying a house recently, but that I think people like to stock that sometimes.
Yeah.
All this fits in, right? The idea of like somebody's done all the work for us already. Let's pull that into our app as we're building it. Now also part of ML Studio and developing different parts of the platform as well.
10,000 plugins in my browser.
Huh, man. Okay, AI safety. This has been like one of the most interesting conversations I think we've been having. And there's like these broad groups without going too down into this. Like there's the regulate AI before we've gotten the plane off the ground. And then there's the don't regulate it at all, just let it fly, right? And then you see the people in our Congress asking questions about AI that they don't even understand. So you have this whole kind of broad ecosystem. But what I've been really impressed by, and just getting very real about this topic, had a lot of really open and transparent conversations with behind the scenes individuals at Microsoft on AI safety. And despite the FUD out there in terms of like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this because AI is going to take over the world and become self-aware and be the next Skynet, like the conversations about true, actual, ongoing, real problems about risk and safety and bias and so on. Very intentional teams of hundreds of people at Microsoft that are invested in building AI safety capabilities right within the platforms. And if you don't believe me, watch the great ongoing content going back many years now on AI safety before AI was really cool in a sense, and now continuing to move forward into this current position. So they baked that right into the Content Safety Studio is now a full range product right within AI Studio that gets part of their ability to develop applications. An example of that would be starting to build filters right within the OpenAI conversational elements to be able to look for different types of potential problems that you might want to just automatically filter out of your experience that you have in a chat interface. That's probably one of the bigger things we've been like questioning about is I'm having a chat. How do I prevent my chat experience about my Ford truck or my Brunswick boat or my this or that from answering questions about someone's mental state, or should I run someone over with it, or should I buy an axe? What are these different types of things, right? So being able to develop these filter levels and getting to a point where it kind of looks like this, right? So this is something they used at the event. I'm looking for an axe to cut a path in the forest. Can you recommend one? Absolutely. Here's an axe to cut a path in the forest. I'm looking for an axe to cut a person in the forest. Can you recommend one? No, I can't. You're not allowed to buy an axe to cut a person in the forest. So these would be examples of like, how do we use some of these capabilities to start to like automatically build out those breakpoints of where we just don't want our chatbot to be able to answer these kinds of questions, or we want them to be able to block it and have a very constrained answer when it hits a certain barrier. And then it puts us also in control of where those levels are. I know that's one of the bigger concerns people have, is like, who's making the decision of what's allowed and what's not allowed? This is an opportunity for us to have a little bit of control over those dials, to be able to understand where AI safety is safety and where AI safety is part of our product. And maybe a certain type of conversation, you have to be able to dig into certain things versus others. So tremendous opportunity for you to learn more about what Microsoft is doing around AI safety, and for that to be a part of the way that you develop your AI platforms as well. And that's part of all of our concerns as we think about each development of an AI add-in or capability on our application for internal or external use. I think monitoring here was really interesting. Alessandro, you want to talk about just even how do we validate and monitor our grounded models?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, right? It's not good enough to sort of do some spot checking when you build a system and you deploy. Each AI-enabled system should be continuously monitored. And so this is an expansion on our ability to monitor these AI systems while they are deployed and in use. And there's all sorts of metrics that are very problem dependent, but as you can see here, Azure AI really offers a unified offering for continuous monitoring of whatever system that you have sort of built and deployed to your users.
Awesome, thanks. All right, moving into a new section. This is the Dev Acceleration section. Brian, this is all you.
All right. So one of the selling points for me going to build this year was some insider knowledge that I had that if you went to build in person, you were going to get access to Copilot X. So for anybody that's been playing around with the Copilot that you currently have available, it's great at giving you prompts, but in terms of being able to interact with it in a chat kind of interface, or be able to ask questions and get relevant examples that you can play with, Copilot X is where that's at. So Nathan had showed this, the Microsoft example about querying for data and having it actually write the SQL script. This is exactly what it's going to do for your applications that you build. So, hey, I want to get this information from this widget and write me an API controller for that, and boom, you got it. Or when I'm working in a file, after I've kind of written my first pass of this new service class that I built, I can just ask it, there's even a short key for it, just /test, and it'll build an entire suite of unit tests for that file that I can, just boom, get rid of it. So where I think this is going to really accelerate development is some of that commodity work that developers really just hate doing. is going to just get done for them. Here we've got some examples of being able to ask, can you write a regular expression for an email address? And I don't have to remember that syntax anymore. And I'll just get those answers for in Copilot. Now, some of this you can do today. So, in the current Copilot, you could just, type a comment, check this for valid email, and boom, it'll give you some prompts, but being able to ask a little bit more meaningful questions or even revise, hey, this regular expression, is a standard one for email addresses. You can reprompt it and say, can you also add this to it as well? And then, so, as I talked about in terms of reducing the amount of commodity work that you can get done, when I started playing with Copilot, I felt that it was about a 20% improvement maybe over my development experience, that, I could get some, I didn't have to look up regular expressions, or didn't have to look up these things that, aren't always top of mind for me. And it was pretty good at giving me those kinds of prompts and responses. But Copilot X is 100%. I mean, it's the level of adaptation that I can get to actually be more productive in my code and just focus on the business problem that I'm trying to solve. And the awareness that it has of my entire application it's mind-boggling, and I can't wait for people to start playing with it. See, Copilot plugins. I don't know if we have a slide on actually getting access to Copilot.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and pause and just talk about that. Get on the wait list. Get on the wait list. Get on the wait list. One thing that you're gonna hear from us today is that this isn't available to everybody, or it's being rolled out slowly. The Copilot for Office being something that's being rolled out slowly. As they're building up the infrastructure to support millions and millions and hundreds of millions of users, these offerings are being slow rolled out to make sure that they're scaling it up appropriately. So there's wait lists. There's, I think, somewhere between 10 and 12 wait lists for Copilot, whether you want it for your Visual Studio, or if you want to do it for Bicep, if you want to have it for different features that are going to be enabled. Go to Copilot on GitHub and sign up for those wait lists. So let's get back to the plugins. More plugins, more AI. Yes, there is a wait list. Some people might have jumped to the front of the line like us that built, but there is a wait list. But in terms of these Copilot chat plugins, again, going back to Microsoft's ecosystem is providing these SDKs so that people can build their own Copilot experiences right into the Visual Studio environment. Here again, you see Jira being kind of one of those that, again, prominently displayed by Microsoft this year. They have plugins that are available through Copilot to help you accelerate, linking your work items to something that might be in Jira. So it's great to see this stuff happening. All right, GitHub Enterprise. So this is a kind of a sore spot in terms of us being able to get into the Copilot. Forewarning on your licensing, that Copilot X and the enterprise licensing isn't quite all wired up together. So your organization can enable Copilot X, but there's a few more hoops that you have to go through. Some of us it worked for, some of us it didn't. So if you've got a personal GitHub and a corporate one, you might run into some issues. But in terms of the enterprise, there's all this is all going to be built into your development stack. So whether it's dealing with Azure Container Apps or the app services, being able to use Copilot inside of the GitHub Enterprise to do your deployments, it's going to accelerate that. As I mentioned before, this is a different wait list if you want to get some of the CI/CD stuff. So check out GitHub, the Copilot sign up page for the wait list for this feature.
I think something else that this represented to me this at Build was how heavily Microsoft is moving toward GitHub Enterprise and GitHub Actions being the normative, investment spot for anything new in deployment.
Yeah, absolutely. They are investing a ton of money One thing that I'd heard some whispers about in terms of Azure DevOps versus GitHub and where this is all going. I actually spoke with both GitHub and the Azure DevOps team when I was there, and there's a lot of synergy with what they're doing. They're not holding back on ADO. It's just going to be a more complete ecosystem moving forward as they kind of go that route.
Mm-hmm. So a couple things that they also released is Azure deployment environments, which is essentially a way to make it easier for your platform engineers to be able to prepare the deployment approach for your manifest. Goes along with something that I have here called App Spaces, which is, there's this conversation essentially about what I write in my Git repository, I have to plan for as being deployable in my deployment environment. And you're seeing Microsoft start to create more templates around how to accelerate the movement from what you're building to actually understanding the manifest of what that looks like, and then being able to deploy that more quickly and seamlessly from their source to the destination. Like a lot of kind of quick starts, but beyond that, also having a manifest language. And there's a couple of projects Microsoft's been talking about that are really all about the manifest, like not just the thing they're deploying, but like how do they talk to each other, being a idempotent language for deploying it within the environment. So these are very, very new areas, but I would recommend you kind of go check out what work they're doing in the manifest area if you're at all involved in the sort of deployment on the kind of infrastructure acceleration space, because that's really how you pair with easing the challenge of this has to be understood on infrastructure as code versus allowing the manifest to be created automatically as a result of the development cycle. And then DevBox. This was one that was confusing for me.
Yeah.
Help us understand DevBox versus code spaces and like what the heck this was.
Yeah. So I'm old and I do all my development kind of on my machine. And if I have to get up and running, like I just had to replace my Surface about a month ago, and it was like 18 hours of like install this, get this, do this. So to accelerate some of those pain points, or to be able to create environments that are can be replicated, there's been code spaces out there for a little bit of time. You could do your development right in GitHub, right? And so DevBox is kind of the same thing, but doing it locally. So DevBox is giving you an environment that's pre-built and pre-baked for your development kind of process within your organization, and can get you up and running a lot quicker without having to install a bunch of tooling within your machine or operating system to get up and running. So just a little bit more consistency for developers, and the ability to be able to switch environments without having a lot of namespace collisions or artifacts like that.
And this is local versus the code spaces type deployment.
Code spaces would be like more of a web centric, and this is the DevBox would be something you can install locally and get up and running.
Cool. Two things that are not new but are receiving a lot of investment are AKS and Azure Container Apps. Actually, let's just hit AKS first, then go to Azure Container Apps. So I don't know if everybody knows this, but Brendan Burns, the inventor of Kubernetes, works at Microsoft, who's behind the investments that continue to happen within AKS. So he has a couple interesting sessions at Build. So if this is like a thing for you, go check out that. Couple interesting things are the Azure backup for AKS, which is kind of an interesting concept in itself, because like containers are supposed to be disposable. Like you don't theoretically have to back them up, but I thought that was interesting. As well as the idea of how they sandbox different parts of the AKS cluster. But I think what was more interesting to me is the forward movement on Azure Container Apps, which, to be very clear, is different than Azure Container Instances and App Services. Like I think this is the worst name Microsoft has. They should call this Azure Container Grid, which is essentially like a managed service for containers. So rather than messing with the AKS environment, you're able to run containers in a space that like you're not having to really worry about the AKS infrastructure itself. You're focusing more on just running containers. Now, the downside is that there's some compatibility issues with Windows containers, but for the most part, people are building on Linux now, so that ends up being less of a thing. But Azure Container Apps, if you're building a new container platform, this ends up being a space to really look at strongly, simply because it abstracts a lot of the infrastructure understanding of AKS, and frankly, not a lot of people understand how that works. So it's a harder skill to learn, and it's one that if you can avoid it, it's a nice one to avoid. So a lot of interesting things happening in this space. There's some cool sessions to go check out if you want to learn more about Azure Container Apps. And then Azure load testing. Alessandra, you had spoken about this one being something you had really focused on. You want to kind of kick around what this means to you?
Yes. So imagine you have a custom application on AKS today, and someone comes to you and say, well, my user count is going to triple the next week. Can you tell me what the response for what my response times, how that's going to be affected? And to answer that question used to be quite challenging, a little bit of custom work. Well, now they're rolling out Azure load testing. So Azure load testing not only allows you to do usage throughput simulations and see how the performance responds, but it can also run many simulated tests with many AKS configurations. So not only you can predict how your service is going to behave if you triple your user count, but also how do you deploy the most performant yet cost-effective cluster ahead of time without sort of cutting some of the trial and error out of the process. So we're all very excited for this feature.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so you could say that we buried the lead on this presentation, because one of the biggest things that came out of Build is something that they're doing in the data platform space, and that is Microsoft Fabric. So Microsoft Fabric is a SaaS version of a data platform. So think of the infrastructure that you're building in Azure as a sort of PaaS version of all the things you do in data platform. And we kind of have had experience working with companies on building that out, and especially in the context of the mesh framework era, right? You have data warehouse 1, data warehouse 2, data warehouse 3, you have your ADF pipelines, all that ending up in an environment that you have to wrap together with Purview. And the biggest challenge that companies have in doing so is to understand how all that works and wrap it together and manage it. So what Microsoft has done is they've created Microsoft Fabric, and Microsoft Fabric's intent is to facilitate mesh concepts in the context of a SaaS platform that you have to understand the underlying data framework less, meaning like I have to manage my subscription, data warehouse, storage account, backup and recovery structure less, and I can understand it in a context of a SaaS platform that handles that load for me. In fact, that was one of the biggest things I was really curious about when this was announced to me at the Microsoft MVP Summit, was like, why? Why are you doing this? What's the point? And it really hit home when we talked about the context of building this idea of a mesh in the context of Fabric, and then using this idea of shortcuts to be able to point through to content in other places. So I think that's one of the things that's really interesting to me is it's an open framework. It's an idea of being able to leverage content that exists already in Azure in different spots and positioning it for your Power BI consumers and other consumers to be able to leverage that data. I think one of the things that Alessandro was interested in is that this includes a data science workbench, and includes access to AWS and Google resources, as well as poking through into your other resources that you have in your Azure environment. So the framework you use to build up an appropriate Azure environment is still consistent. If you built it up in a mesh framework using separate subscriptions, that makes the right sense. It's how you would have built it. But on top of that now lives the sort of ability to do this in a SaaS way. And all these different elements sort of become part of that picture. I love the term one lake. It totally jives with when OneDrive became a thing. And I was like, what the hell do I do with all my personal documents or individual documents I'm working on? Or just simplifying the idea of us working with content together. Now this idea of calling it one lake, which doesn't necessarily mean that the content isn't still segregated per users. But I think the biggest interesting thing about this is it reduces the duplicative nature of building a mesh. I may need less copies of the content in a publisher subscriber model, because I can poke through to content that exists in a certified spot and then make that available to someone that's consuming it and put a virtual box around the data domain versus necessarily having to make a physical box around the data domain. So I think there's a lot to progress here from the OneLake. This is essentially like a version 2 of Synapse would be another way to kind of think about this, but done in a SaaS format. And they've completely reinvented the processing model behind Synapse from a performance standpoint. So there's a free trial in this right now. I would just totally just spin it up, play with it, tear it down again. A great opportunity for us to be able to kind of look at how this could be part of the picture, even if you've already invested in building your sort of standard model that would exist in your Azure tenant. Also think about this in the context of its relationship to Purview being kind of very tightly coupled. So the work that you do in Purview already kind of relates directly into the work that you do in Fabric, understanding that this also pokes into content that you would have in GCP and AWS and other sources.
Yeah, a question that came up. I had a bunch of people that were hitting me up, while I was at Build, like, hey, can you ask this? Can you go to this thing, do this thing? First off, like, everything about Fabric was a wait list to get in. I mean, it was really, really hard to get into any of the sessions around Fabric. I did get a chance to talk with the product team, at their booth and ask some of the questions. So one thing to understand is that, like, they're taking care of everything for you on the infrastructure side. So you're not, spinning up your own data lakes or figuring out how these components are built together, or having to figure out how to wire up your pipelines. Like, that's all part of the SaaS platform. So pluses and minuses there. You can't really hit it up directly. You don't really necessarily see what's there, what isn't. But then you don't have to have all the resources that are going to be managing that, along the way. And then there's some really cool Power BI features that are built into this as well that, that take some of the complexity out of, like, combining, multiple data sets or columns together. There were some questions that were answered around that. And then I think the final point is, guess what's coming to Fabric? Copilot. Sorry.
Of course. Yeah. Okay. This is a little bit of a shot of the relationship of the lake with workspaces, which are essentially data domains that sit in the context of the unified framework for management. We want to talk more about this. Let's talk more about it. Actually, we're still right on time. We actually may make it through this content today. This is crazy.
Pretty close.
Okay. So Power Apps, like, this was one of the things, Power Apps and Power BI. I don't know if I have a slide on Power BI, but like the self-creation of Power BI reports was nuts to me.
Yeah.
Like, they had a thing where, like, you kind of like are chat GPTing a Power BI report and it building it for you. Which was just, you have to, I don't think I have a slide on that, but I would go look it up because it was really wild. But the idea of doing this in the context of Power Apps was even more wild. Like, the idea of, hey, tell me what kind of form you want and have it go create it based upon your ask from a chat interface. Now, like, most of us who are like doing full scale development, you're like, whatever, like, we build our own stuff. But for like your commodity developers across organizations that you're trying to accelerate, turn everyone into a developer, this is incredibly exciting. Like, the speed to develop. I was at a session with Charles and Rama a few months ago, and he kind of described it as like power, like we can all do PowerPoints. Like, he wants development to be as easy as PowerPoint development. And PowerPoint development is going to be now driven by, like, create me a presentation on X. But I think this is really fascinating. We're seeing more companies that are like driving toward low code development through interfaces like this. Even to a point where, like, you see this interface, start building your flow with Copilot, describe the flow, it creates it for you, builds it based on the chat interface, and then you start kind of continuing to chat with it to say, like, no, this isn't really what I wanted, adjust it, which is fascinating.
Yep. And it builds all the connectors for you and don't have to worry about it.
What are they going to need us for?
They're not going to need us.
I think that even the interface of ChatGPT and grounding ChatGPT content into Power Apps through Power Virtual Agents was exciting to me as well. That like pointing it at a website, making that the published content for the Power Virtual Agent, or even attaching that to grounded content the way we just showed in that previous architecture, sort of consistent architecture, essentially, that Power Virtual Agents can now sort of take advantage of those same kinds of grounded content that we're doing in more broader use cases. Same thing with the plugins being built right into Power Virtual Agents. So if you're building a Power Virtual Agent, those plugins we talked about earlier are present here too, just like in everything else that you're constructing, which I thought was really, really interesting. And then this is one that like I think is a long time coming, which is deployment pipelines and Power Apps. Like,
man, you know, this is something that a lot of companies have been struggling with, is how to you know, how to operationalize a lot of this. And while CI/CD has always been a little bit of a pain point for most people to like understand in the Power Platform, this is really simplifying that to the point where non-developers can really do it.
Totally. Okay, more extra Power Apps features. Just continue to eat your heart out if you're in that community. But now, Nick Woods has been waiting patiently this entire time about Entra, which we were in the private preview for. So this was really exciting to actually be able to start talking about now. Like, what is Entra External Identities, Nick?
Yeah, okay. So Entra External Identities is Microsoft's new offering for consumer kind of a B2C so if you're like developing a consumer-faced app, this will be kind of your authentication, authorization, management space. So right now, Microsoft does have a product called B2C for this. But B2C, right, and it's a very powerful product. B2C is kind of their current generation offering. But there's a couple pain points with it. One of them is the fact that it handles authentication very, very well, but it doesn't really handle authorization. You can do it, but it's very complicated to set up. So one of the things that Entra External Identities is going to bring to the table is it's going to be much more similar to kind of the workforce centered like B2 internal the Azure Active Directory that you know and love. So you're going to be able to use kind of the same like very granular feature set, the same that you're currently using for employees, kind of in terms of permissioning, in terms of in terms of like developing an authorization regime for your applications, and you can bring that over to your customer space. The other one is that the B2C, because so B2C has like a couple of different ways of setting things up, right? So it has user flows, which are pretty straightforward, pretty easy, but it also has custom policies. And then again, this is where a lot of the power of B2C comes from. But B2C, the problem with custom policies is that they're very, very intricate. They're kind of large pain point that our customers have. They're hard to set up. They kind of take a while to learn how to do. So one of the goals here is that they're going to, so they've already, it's a very early public preview. So you can go ahead and create a tenant right now and so play around with it yourself. But they've already started adding features. Most of them are kind of the user flows, but they're kind of they're putting a lot more thought, putting a lot more effort into making these like more advanced features that you're currently finding in B2C more accessible. And they're going to keep adding more and more things to this. So you saw on the previous slide, they've already added, federation with, social identities. So you can add, Facebook or Google login to your page. And that's pretty easy, a lot easier to set up than using B2C custom policies. And they also, so kind of claims, so like making sure you're passing information from B2C, from these, Entra External Identities to your application. They're making that very straightforward. They already have OIDC support, and it's already something you can go ahead and play around with, hook up to your applications, and go ahead and start, provide the feedback. They're looking for a lot of feedback for this right now. So
usability-wise, like crazy difference, right?
Yeah, I think
yeah.
Nick did a really good job of talking about this, but I want to like stress this, like, the learning curve for B2C is intimidating, and most developers have shied away from it. The approach that they're taking with this platform is a little bit more developer friendly, and so it's going to require a little less specified XML, B2C policy management skills. And I think it's, developers are going to enjoy being able to work with it, as well as just getting that rich feature set. So the other thing to kind of call out here is that when you go to create an external identities, rather than like, do I have to do B2B, B2C, AD, like which one am I going to use? You're just going to Entra and then you're going to like pick your target. So I'm creating, an external identities tenant for customers, rather than like having to figure out which platform that you want to use for different scenarios. You're just going to the platform and picking who you're targeting for it. It's really cool. It's been fun.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we have skipped over a little bit of the infrastructure, Prometheus, confidential computing things. Those are things you can kind of check out later. What to do next? Ultimately, the reason we do this event is because we want to be like super plugged in to build ourselves. This is like actually the most fun deck I've created in a while, because I got to like watch all the sessions that I wanted to watch and produce the most interesting things I thought were interesting. So it was kind of a fun way to spend a few hours over the weekend working on creating this. And what to do next? Ultimately, the reason we do this for everyone is because we just want to be stewards within the community, helping you be aware of the cool things that Microsoft's doing at Build and being able to take advantage of it. If you want us to help like educate more on this session, we'd be happy to do it in the context of your environment or your company. So this is a good opportunity for you. If you want to like bring the best of Build to you, we can always redo this and talk about it with you. We're also going to be sharing this information as a recording. So if you want to just have your developers be able to say like, hey, cool, what happened over the last week without watching 64 sessions, take advantage of this. You can send your recording around to the different people in your group. Or if you want to start evaluating one of these scenarios, like all the really awesome things happening in OpenAI, Microsoft Fabric, or modern development cycles, we are here for it. That's like what we do at Concurrency. So if you want us to help accelerate that in your organization, working with your teams, that's what we're here to help with. So we're super thankful to be here with you today and to have your time to be able to walk through these awesome things we experienced. And also thankful that we got through this content for the most part without skipping the things that we really were excited about. Thanks to Brian and Alessandre and Nick for helping present. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for being part of this this day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.